He believed waiting was harmless, that stillness kept things possible, that nothing could be lost while nothing was chosen. There was a bench that rarely changed, would worn smooth by time, place where people sometimes paused and then moved on. He returned to it often, not because it was comfortable, but because it asked nothing from him. He would sit there with his hands resting loosely, shoulders relaxed, eyes unfixed. The bench held his weight without response. It did not suggest direction. It did not insist on movement. Waiting shaped his days quietly, not as an action, but as an absence of one. Moments passed near him, then away, leaving no clear trace. Some people thought he was patient. Others assumed he was careful. No one noticed how practiced his stillness had become. The bench marked a pause between before and after. He treated that pause as a place rather than a moment. Something solid. Something he could return to. He arrived at similar times, sat in similar ways. The repetition felt safe, familiar enough to avoid questions. His attention drifted without landing. Sounds came and went. Movements passed at the edges of his vision. None of it demanded response. There were occasions when his posture shifted forward slightly, as if standing were close, as if leaving were already forming. Then the moment passed. The bench remained. So did he. He had learned that waiting delayed consequences, that decisions lost their sharpness if left untouched. That time, stretched thin enough, became forgiving. The bench supported that belief. It stayed where it was. It did not age in ways he noticed. It did not remind him how long he had been there. From a distance, nothing seemed wrong. He appeared settled, contained, unrushed. Inside, there was a quiet sense of suspension. Not discomfort, not peace, just the feeling that something was being held open. And the assumption, never spoken, that it could remain that way a little longer. He stayed with that rhythm longer than he realized. Waiting stopped feeling temporary. It settled into something steady, almost dependable. The bench became part of his routine, not a destination. A pause that repeated itself so often it felt permanent. He noticed small details now. The way the surface held warmth for a while, then let it go. The faint marks left by others who never stayed long. None of them remained long enough to feel familiar. He adjusted his position without thinking. Leaning back, sitting forward, always returning to the same neutral balance. Time moved around him instead of through him. He observed its passing without engaging. Moments arrived close, then slipped away, unchanged by his presence. There were signs that staying had a cost, though he rarely named them. Opportunities did not disappear. They simply stopped coming close enough to reach. He told himself that noticing was enough. That awareness counted as preparation. That movement could wait until everything felt clear. The bench made that belief easy to maintain. It did not rush him. It did not shift beneath his weight. It allowed him to remain exactly as he was. He began to measure days by how long he sat, by how often he returned, by how natural it felt to do nothing. Sometimes his attention sharpened. A passing moment lingered longer than usual. His body responded before his thoughts did. Then hesitation followed. A quiet pulling back. The familiar relief of staying. Waiting no longer felt like a choice. It felt like the absence of risk. A way to avoid the weight of consequence. The bench supported that illusion. It stayed solid. Unchanging. Always available. From the outside, it still looked like patience. Like calm restraint. Like someone wisely taking time. From within, something began to thin. Not urgency. Not regret. Just the growing sense that waiting was no longer holding things open. It was slowly narrowing them. The shift did not arrive as a warning. It came as a quiet change in texture. The familiar pause no longer felt open. It felt contained. He noticed it first in his body. The way sitting took more effort than before. The way standing no longer felt like an interruption, but a question left unanswered. The bench was still there. Its shape unchanged. Its surface worn in the same places, but no longer felt neutral. Moments began to pass closer than before. Not near enough to grasp, but near enough to be felt. He became aware of how often he leaned forward without rising. How his hands pressed against the wood, then relaxed again. How movement formed and dissolved in the same breath. The space around the bench felt narrower. Not physically. Impossibility. He started to recognize what waiting had cost him. Not through loss, but through accumulation. Each moment he had stayed became part of the weight that kept him there. Each delay added another layer of certainty that moving would be harder later. He had believed waiting preserved options. Now it seemed to be rearranging them quietly, pushing some farther away, making others less distinct. The bench did not respond to this realization. It offered the same support it always had. It did not loosen its hold. It did not encourage release. He understood then that waiting had become a structure, something built over time, something that required effort to step out of. The clarity he had expected arrived without relief. There was no sense of readiness, only the awareness that readiness had never been required to begin. The moment he had been waiting for had not been missing. It had been passing through him, unnoticed, again and again. He stayed seated, not because he chose to, but because standing now felt like breaking a pattern that had taken too long to form. The bench remained. Solid. Familiar. And for the first time, he sensed that staying was no longer about waiting. It was about return. Not the kind that brings someone back to a place, but the kind that makes leaving increasingly difficult. He did not leave the bench when the feeling settled. There was no clear signal to stand. No moment that felt final enough to justify it. The world continued its motion nearby, passing without pause. Not hurried. Not delayed. The bench remained steady beneath him. It did not tighten its hold. It did not release him either. He noticed how natural staying had become. How little effort it required. How much effort leaving now seemed to ask. Waiting had once felt like space. Now it felt like shape. Defined. Contained. He understood that nothing dramatic had stopped him. No barrier. No refusal. Only repetition. Each return to the bench had felt temporary. Together, they had formed something lasting. The realization arrived quietly. Not as regret. Not as panic. As recognition. Some choices did not disappear when ignored. They hardened. They became less flexible over time. The bench had never asked him to stay. It had simply been there each time he chose not to move. He remained seated, aware now that waiting no longer delayed anything. It had already done its work. The moments he thought he was protecting had passed through him without resistance. They had not waited with him. They had continued. The bench held the weight of that understanding without comment. It offered the same support it always had. Nothing more. He sat a while longer. Not because he was unsure, but because standing no longer promised return. Some mistakes did not announce themselves when they were made. They settled in quietly, and by the time they were understood, they were already complete. Some moments are not missed by choice. They pass because there is no time left. Most people realize it much later. If you have ever looked back at a place you cannot return to, this feeling may be familiar.